May today's games usher in a new age of peace and cooperation in the galaxy.
In the days of Megatron, it was not like this. You mean Voltron? Well, they were the same guy. All called Ultra Magna steps in our way. Quiet, Starscream. I put a correlation to its end.
We introduce the hero of the Cybertronian wars, the leader of the Autobots, the bearer of the Matrix.
TFCon locals, Jack Angel.
Scrapper. They've brought out the heavy artillery. Come on, our feet, let's go.
TFCon welcome, New Rock.
Did you guys want to chat it first, or do you want to do Q&A?
Yeah. What's Q&A?
You don't want to know. Q. I assume this guy has a Q, which would be a question.
Right.
And then hopefully
Please apply the
I
A.
can have the
Well, you know,
to his Q's.
Dick Godier would have been here, but he passed away 6
No
hours ago.
excuse.
And I just thought I wanted to tell you, one of the last things that Dick Godier said was he said he was driving down the street and he rear-ended the guy in the car. And just a tap, there was no damage, but the guy gets out and it's a dwarf. And the guy walks around, looks at the car, and he's frowning, and Dick says, "Are you okay, sir?" And he's still frowning, and he says, "Sir, are you all right?" He says, "I am not happy." And Dick said, "Well, which one are you?"
I got nothing. What do you got?
So, how did the makers of the cartoon decide which particular characters were you going to play? Or did you have a preference for which Autobots and Decepticons you were going to be?
Well, I don't know about Jack. They begged me to be in the show and said, take any part you want. Did you have to actually read for it?
No, I didn't even know the difference between an Autobot and a Decepticon, even when we were in the midst of doing the show. It never sunk in exactly. No, they had been doing it for a while, and they ran out of characters. I mean, they ran out, you know, there's a limit to the number of characters one guy can do. So they needed new blood. And I was part of that new blood transfusion and wound up doing 7 different characters.
But it was all very loosey-goosey. I was kidding around with my original answer. It was all auditioned. They would invite actors to come in, sometimes total strangers that were recommended by an agent, sometimes actors they were familiar with. They'd say, here's this thing, what do you got? And sometimes they would have a rough idea of what they wanted. Sometimes they didn't have a clue, and in the middle of an audition somebody would go, that, do that, we like that. And suddenly you would find that you were this character in Transformers.
Well, Wally Burr was the director, but I had worked with Wally on the Challenge of the Super Friends with Hanna-Barbera earlier. And I was Hawkman, the Flash, and Super Samurai. So I was able to do 3 voices, and Wally knew that I was fairly versatile, so when they needed some new blood, he called. I didn't have to audition, he just knew what he wanted, and he knew that I could do it. So, but I did have to audition for all that stuff in Hanna-Barbera, so it just sort of depends on who's doing what.
In those days, it was an auditioning business. The late Joni Gerber, I was in a workshop with her, marvelously talented actress. I don't think she did a lot of animation, but she did a million commercials, and she said, voicelings, as she called us. She said, before we even start, there are some things you need to know. There are no stars in voiceovers. In those days, celebrities weren't doing them, so she was correct. She says, you will always have to read for it, and they are never going to send a limousine. And boy, was she not kidding.
So really they just gave you a picture and said, what kind of voice do you think goes along with this character?
90% of the time there's a drawing, maybe a profile and a full-on shot, almost like they were criminals, and a one-paragraph description. And from that point on, I guess you probably work the way I do. You look at the picture, you read the description, you hope to have some sort of a voice appears in your head, and then you try to reproduce it.
Well, part of the thing with Transformers was they synthesized most of the voices.
Yeah.
So it didn't really matter. I mean, if I listened to the show, I wouldn't know my voice because they'd run it through some kind of a thing and make it sound like a big hunk of metal. So, it didn't really matter. Just get in. Like, one of the first voices I did was Ramjet. Ramjet was a Decepticon. And Ramjet was this kind of a guy. I mean, with a name like Ramjet, what kind of a voice would you give him, Yes, please.
Hi, this is Ramjet. Now you know why you didn't get that
I only thought of that.
What was your favorite line to say as any of the characters from the cartoon?
When is my check going to be ready?
That's a good one. I didn't think too much of it at the time that I performed it, but when the movie premiered in Westwood, and Springer said the immortal words, "I've got better things to do tonight than die," the whole place went. And I thought, my gosh, that might be something that I remembered.
Pick that up the tombstone.
Yeah, I just might.
I have a question for Jack Angel.
Seeger?
I'm
He's
Gabe
coming
Yuga.
Yeah.
I'm Gabe Yuga, and I'm from Virginia. I live in Virginia. Jack Angel, sir, how did you do that by making Astral Train sound both normal and high pitch at the same time?
Well, that's what I said. They ran it through a synthesizer, and they fiddled with it and made it come out like that. I didn't do anything. I think they ran the voice through twice and melded it together so it sounded like they were a high and a low. But I read it once. They fiddled with it.
The technical term in the business is they futzed with it. Actually, in those days it was all analog, so it probably was a hell of a lot of work. Now, digitally, you just push a button and it happens. But
Yeah.
in the radio days, we used to do, we probably did the same stuff, dopey stuff like tying scotch tape around the capstan to make it do this,
Yeah.
all kinds of, it was tough in those days, analog, but nowadays it's not. Anyway, he was futz.
Well, anyways, I think I enjoyed your Astral Train character, Mr. Jack Angel.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Gentlemen, hello. Thank you very much for being here. I had a quick question. So what would you tell an aspiring voice actor if they were going through college? Is there a particular course path or career path you would recommend they follow? I know that a lot of it's just opportunity and it just comes to you and maybe you go through an agent. But
Where do you live?
So I live locally in Virginia.
Well, if you want to be a voice actor in animation, you have to go to LA. And, it's not such a bad place.
Well, not if you bring a lot of money with you.
No, the bulk of animation is done in Los Angeles. So if you're really serious about doing it, eventually you're going to have to move there. The cheap way to get an animation education is to listen to her website, that's Arlene Thornton, and she's a talent agent in LA, and she has a website. And if you go to arlenethornton.com, then the rest of you just pick up the animation guys and listen to all of the animation guys do what they do and steal.
Vocal plagiarism.
Yeah. Well, it's like, you know, if I do a voice like this and you do a voice like this, right? But you forgot that you did a voice like this. You go, oh, I do that voice. So, you know, you change the words around a little bit, add a little sound effect here and there, and now you've got a short little piece of that character. And you string them all together and you have a demo tape, and then you take it to an agent, and if they like it, if you're good enough.
But as far as preparation, I would say any chance you get to perform in any sort of way, plays, public speaking, go down to the Greyhound bus station and make announcements, any place they'll let you. And of course, get your little digital recorder and just practice, man. I mean, you hear an interesting voice in a television show, see if you can reproduce it or come up with something that's slightly different. I mean, I don't think there's any way to prepare for this. I compulsively fooled around with doing voices and accents. I've done it ever since I can remember.
Yeah, me too.
Not with any thought of ever having a career. It's just like some kids build model planes. I sat in my room and did this. But any chance you get to perform, because it'll make you. One of the big problems is people come up and go, well, when I'm at home with my family, I make them laugh and I do this, and I go, okay, good, fine. You're in the loving arms of your family. But show up in Burbank at 9 in the morning, and there's a bunch of people who aren't real happy about being there looking at you through the glass, all right, what do you got? And suddenly you forget you were ever an actor at all. You just want to run out of there.
When you're brand new, you're insecure about everything. And you're in a studio, and there's a director, and a writer, and a producer, and an engineer, and all those people looking out the glass at you. And you're standing there alone.
It's like being a fish in a bowl.
And they say, okay, Jack, take one. And you do it. And they say, hold it for a second. And then here's what you see. They're saying, where did you get this guy? Oh my, well, I mean, come on, we wanted a professional. Whatever, you think they're saying crazy stuff. They're talking about dinner, they're talking about, did you get this line cleared through legal? So, but your mind is always gonna, initially, your mind is always gonna make up this negative stuff. So my rule is, my God, he's wonderful. Where did you get him? I told you, we should hire him for all of our stuff. Yeah.
I told you that 2 weeks ago.
But now he's going to be much more expensive. I don't care, okay? They're not saying that either. But as long as you're going to make something up, make that up. And when they say, okay, take two, you're ready to be a big star. Right. Okay.
Gentlemen, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Okay. I was wondering what it was like back when you were doing Generation 1, when Transformers was a new thing, and how it felt. Voice acting these big giant robots.
Yeah, as Jack indicated, we didn't know doodly squat. I started out doing G.I. Joe, and then my agent said, Wally's got another show. I said, he does? Yeah, you want to read for that? No, I think I'll just go home and clean my sock drawer. Yes, of course I want to read for it. So I get this part. I forget if it was Hook, Slag, or Bones, and I show up, and there's, Welker and Peter Cullen and everybody, and nobody explains anything. I'm just standing there listening to these characters. and I got no idea what's going on. And I must have had 10 or 15 episodes under my belt before I gradually started getting a little bit of the concept. Was that what it was like for you, Jack?
Yeah, I guess I did attribute a lot of my success in animation to Wally Burr, but because he kept hiring me and giving me new roles and new parts. But there was a show, Jem and the Holograms, and I was Jem's father, and in G.I. Joe I was Wetsuit.
Yeah.
And Transformers, I was 7 different Transformers. But the thing about Wally, he directed all these different shows, and they all played in the afternoon, and every show that Wally directed was #1 in its time block. So the magical ingredient in all of those shows was Wally Burr. And he was a taskmaster. I don't know, he was a tank commander in World War II. And I never knew whether he was mean because he was a tank commander, or he got to be a tank commander because he was mean. But if you got on his bad side, he just was the nastiest man in the world. But he was an Army officer, but I was an Army officer during the time of the Korean War. And so we swapped Army notes, and because we were had been officers, we had a kind of a mutual respect on that level. So when he was giving people a hard time, he never gave me a hard time except once. And he would say, no, you're not reading that right. Listen. And he'd give me a line reading, and I'd try it. He said, no, that's not it. Listen. And he'd do it again. Jack, listen. And he would do it again. And finally, I just did an imitation of him, and he said, well, now you're just doing an imitation of me. And you could feel the room, everybody, everybody, oh my God, it's Jack's turn. And then he said, well, I guess that's okay. Because Wally really wanted to do all the characters on all the shows. And he was good at that, he probably could have.
Well, that was high praise from Jack. He once gave me a, yeah, I guess so.
Okay, and I was wondering if you could do a quick voice acting for my dad.
Of what?
Of Springer.
Out, brief candle, life's but a walking shadow, a poor player who struts and frets his hour upon the stage and then is heard no more. A tale told by an idiot filled with sound and fury and signifying nothing. I just made that up, I don't know.
Well done. Howdy. Hey, throughout y'all's voice careers and everything, was there ever a time of an outtake or a blooper that y'all went back and like, oh, that was a good time, that you could share with us?
I'm drawing a blank. I know there's a swear word that ended up in the Transformers movie that originally was an actor expressing his frustration over having blown a line, and somehow they decided to put it in there.
Really?
Yeah. Wally was asked about that at an appearance we made, and he said, yeah, that's what happened.
That was Daniel, yeah.
I forget what the actual word was. But
oh, shit.
Was it? Oh, yeah. Apparently that was somebody getting mad at themselves for muffing a line, and somebody put it in the movie. But outtakes. I'm sure there's a wonderful story, but I'm drawing a blank. I'm sorry. If I happen to think of it later,
Whenever I think of the sessions that we did at Wally Burr Studio, well, the studio, you could walk down the hall and there was a sliding door that made noise. And Frank Welker was always in the session, and he would sit there and he could imitate the door. So every once in a while, the door would open, and you'd go to see nobody there. It was Frank.
Frank is so good, maybe you all know this, not just his acting, but he does these sound effects with his mouth that are just astonishing. One of his best things is he does this sound that sounds like electronics burning up. And he, not a muscle moves in his face. I can't do it. I'll do some bad impression of it. And engineers will dive under the looking for the smoke. Frank will just have this little smile.
He has on his license plate, he has 13 ducks on his license plate. And the 13 ducks comes from the fact that he does a little thing. He's as a Donald Duck character. He'll do that, do the thing. And he say, well, let's sing a Christmas carol. And then he could, whatever he does, it sounds like 13 of them. And wish you a Merry Christmas. And I mean, it's the craziest thing you ever heard. I've never heard anybody else able to do that, but Frank does it all the time. And it's just, rolls off the him. For my money, if you were to ask me who was the most talented voiceover guy I ever heard, I would say Welker.
Well,
and there's not a mean bone in his body. He's the nicest man.
Y'all are wonderful gentlemen. Thank you for joining us here at TFCon.
One of the most intimidating days I ever had was when they sent me to do a project and they said, he's sick, you're filling in for Frank Welker. I said there should be 14 more people in this car.
Well, we did Balto, and sled dogs and wolves, and they had a point where the wolves were fighting. Welker did all the voices of all the wolves.
Wow.
He was just crazy. Brilliant.
I'm glad to see both of you here, but my question is for Jack. I was wondering, in the movie, the 86 movie, the Ultra Magnus character was voiced by Robert Stack.
Mm-hmm.
And so in season 3, you took over that. How closely did they want you to voice match? Were you doing an impression of Robert Stack like the whole time?
No, Wally just said for everybody, each guy took a shot at it. And I just happened that I got closer to Robert Stack's voice than anybody else at that point, so I got the part. I also did Cyclonus, but the original guy in the series was Roger C. Carmel, who was Harry Mudd in Star Trek. So that he had a big handlebar mustache and a very remote guy, and a lot of gesticulations as he talked. And he was flowery and wonderful. And whenever he walked into the studio, I would say, ladies and gentlemen, Roger C. Carmel. But unfortunately, Roger stuffed some white powder up his nose. And one day they said, where's Roger? He's supposed to be at a job. And went to his apartment and found that he had stuffed too much white powder on his nose and he died. So they had to find somebody to do that role. And so they chose me. There was Orson Welles did the part first, Roger did the part next, and they both died. So I thought they were trying to get rid of me.
Well, you know that old saying, third man on the script.
Yeah.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Hey guys. So I have a question for both. For Jack, since Robert Stack did such a great job, how was the pressure for you to follow such a great performance in that movie? And then for Neil, how was it trying to live up to the pressure and the hype of the movie afterwards in the TV series?
I had such a giant ego that, if they wanted me to do that part, I did the part, and I didn't consider, I thought Robert Stack did a great job in the movie too. Mm-hmm. And I watched him for years, he was a star. But then it was my part then, so I I sounded enough like Robert Stack apparently that I could just do me and it was not a problem.
You did a good job.
You know, I don't recall feeling pressured. Of course, I was not replacing anybody. I was extraordinarily lucky with Springer. Because what they were doing was with that movie, they were killing off a lot of the characters. You know? They were introducing new ones who would be played by celebrities in the movie and then be replaced by us, you should pardon the expression, plane rap actors for the television series. But nobody ever explained it to me, but I'm assuming it's because Springer had appeared in a few episodes before the movie that they let me have that part. But I've often thought I probably came within a whisker rather, of being replaced by somebody. But I was lucky enough to get in the movie, and I'm very, very grateful for that.
Thanks, guys.
Hello and greetings to you both.
I was behind him.
Oh, I'm sorry. I thought you were. I'm sorry.
I thought you were going to do a duet.
Yeah. I thought you were with Con.
What do you got?
You know Camelot? I'm just kidding.
I know.
I'm just kidding. Anyway, Mr. Ross.
Yes, sir.
You've been on Voltron. Have you seen the reboot of Voltron?
No, I'm very lazy. I must confess. I have Netflix, but somehow I sit down at night and instead I put on a strange, disturbing cop show of one kind or another. But I will watch it. I'm told it's very, very good.
What? Voltron?
The new Voltron, yes.
Oh, the new Voltron. Oh no, we discount all the new stuff. I mean, you know, I was Hazar and Zarkon both in the old Voltron series. Who could possibly do Zarkon better than me?
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Sorry about that. Hello and welcome to you both. Two people ahead of me brought up Robert Stack, and I'm sorry to be the third one to bring it up. But I was just curious if you were prepared, Jack, to step in and do a whole new series of unsolved mysteries.
Do it. That never came up.
I think it'd be fantastic.
Yeah, well, tell somebody who controls that, and I'll have a whole new career.
And then you'd have a new show to watch along with your Disturbing Cop show.
Exactly.
You two take care. Thank you very much.
Hello. I was just wondering if you had a favorite role outside of Transformers for voice acting?
Well, I have a very soft spot in my heart for Keith in Voltron because that was the first big part I ever landed in a cartoon show. Up until then, I had done guest shots on shows, but I had been a regular cast member, but a secondary cast member, and Keith, to my mind, was kind of the lead in that show, and that's the first lead role I ever got, so I have a soft spot for that. And of course, I love our old pal Shipwreck. I mean, you can't do And maybe the Green Goblin and Spider-Man, that was fun to do. Well, fun, it depends on your definition of fun. Tony Pastor wanted it loud and he wanted a lot of takes, and I would walk out of there with a splitting headache sometimes, but it was still fun to do.
Tony Pastor couldn't read. He was so dyslexic, he could not read the script. So we would have somebody read the script to him so he'd know what the show was about, and then he would direct it. And it was so bizarre. Really, Michael Bell replaced him on some shows because it just got to be out of hand. He was a great guy, just couldn't read,
I never knew that.
Now I'll tell you something about Voltron. Voltron was owned, was a Japanese show, obviously, and it was owned by a company out of St. Louis who weren't familiar with the way things operated in Los Angeles. They had worked out all the details of the sentences. They timed them out. They knew what they wanted to say, and we went in not knowing what the characters looked like sometimes, and we did a whole episode in like 20 minutes because it was just my lines, and then he would go in and do his lines, and Peter Cullen would go in and do his. So, and then they would glue them all together, and they had this show. So we did 125 episodes in 6 months. Now, they didn't want to do residuals. That's where, you know, each time they run a show, they have to pay you again and again and again and again. They didn't want to do that. So they said, we'd like to do a 10-run buyout. So the Screen Actors Guild said, look, okay, but that would mean that you would have to pay each actor $1,200 an episode. Wow. And there were 125 episodes. Do the math.
That would have been nice.
Everybody bought a house.
It was Voltron, Defender of the Universe. I used to call it Voltron, Defender of my mortgage.
Hi there. Everyone's already brought up Robert Stack, so I'm not gonna. But you did mention earlier when you guys started in voice acting, they told you, it's not a celebrity game, you don't get a limo and whatnot. Mm-hmm. And when they did the movie, that kind of marked a big shift in that industry. You got big names there, you got like Chuck Nelson and Leonard Nimoy, Orson Welles. What was it like going into that environment all of a sudden? You got Spock sitting here next to you, and you're like, I just did a cartoon last week.
Well, I don't know how it was for Jack. I only worked with 2 of the celebrities. I worked with Judd Nelson and Lionel Stander, and I have one good Lionel Stander story, if you like, but I didn't meet or work with any of the other folks. I don't know about you.
Nobody did. I mean, Orson Welles read alone with Wally.
I don't work with other actors. They waste my time.
When Wells went in to read, he was like a planet. He was huge. He had steel enforced shoes because his regular shoes would just collapse from the weight. And speaking of Dick Gautier, there was what was that restaurant in LA? The tent. There was a great Ma Maison restaurant. It was a tent outside, and
Wolfgang Puck, really trendy. All the stars went there at one point.
Yeah, he was the chef there before he was the famous Wolfgang Puck. And Orson Welles obviously loved to eat. So Dick Gautier said there was a friend of his who went there, and he noticed that Welles was in the corner eating, and he thought, oh my God, I'm such a great fan of Orson Welles. I wish I could go and speak to him and just shake his hand. And all of a sudden, Welles is on his feet, waddling toward the exit, and the guy just jumps out of his chair, runs across to the restaurant, grabs Orson Welles by the hand, and said, Mr. Welles, I'm a great fan of yours, and I just wanted to shake the hand of the great man. And Welles said, thank you very much. And then the guy knows he has nothing more to say because and I found the flaw in Citizen Kane. Now, for those who don't know, Citizen Kane was his masterpiece. And he says, yeah, the movie opens and you're lying there dying, and you have a globe in your hand, and there's a what? Snow globe. And you drop it and you say, Rosebud. But just before you drop the globe, the nurse walked out of the room. He said, later they asked the nurse, what did he say? And she said, well, he said Rosebud. But she had already left the room. And Welles looked at him and said, tell no one what you told me.
Now, Orson Welles very soon after performing in Transformers,
Yeah, he did.
which led to the amusing remark that Wally Burr had killed him. In fact, at a session once, Wally interrupted Michael Bell in the middle of a line reading, and Bell said, "Don't start up with me, Wally. You're the man who killed Orson Welles." So we wanted it, we couldn't do it then because we'd have had to spend thousands of dollars in an edit bay. Now some kid in Cleveland with a computer could do it in 2 seconds. We wanted to get that scene, the Rosebud scene. It's a close-up of Wells' lips, and he's going, he doesn't say that. Rosebud. Children. And we were going to dub in Wally Burr. And invite him to a party and play it for him, but we never did.
I saw him at a session one time, and all the principal actors of that movie were still alive. And you know, in the movie, they all get old. Well, he said, I want to go back and re-record now that everybody's old. But he could never get any financing to do it. But it would have been a great idea. You know, I mean, in generation earlier. Here they are again, in reality, old men. When he walked in to do whatever he did in Transformers, Wally said, well, do you mind if I read with you? I'll read you the other lines. And he said, no, I'd prefer it if you did. And so Wally started reading, and he said, well, you're not going to do you're not going to give me line readings, are you? He said, I would presume to do that. He said, well, why are you reading my lines? He said, oh, those are not your lines, you're the other guy. So all of his preparation, if there was any for him, went out the tube, you know, or down the tube. How's that work?
Both works.
Thank you much, I appreciate it.
Yeah.
The Lionel story.
Yeah. The what?
Lionel
Oh,
Sanders. Everybody know who Lionel was? Yeah, Cup was his character, but he was a character. He actually was old enough to have appeared in a silent movie. And I think he was in his 80s when we worked with him, and he had these hearing aids, but in the green room he was fine, he could hear everything. But as soon as he got in the studio and Wally started talking to him, suddenly he became deaf. So he did this line, I can't remember what it was, let's just say it was, "The Decepticons are coming," and that's pretty much what he sounded like. And Wally said, all right, that's good, Lionel, but now remember, you're here and they're there, and you don't want them to know, but then you want them to know that you don't know that they, and he went on and on and on and on. Got all that, Lionel? All right, take two. And Lionel looks over at me and goes, what did he say? And I said, he said, do it again louder. The Decepticons are coming. Perfect, Lionel. Great. Moving on. It shows you I should have been a director.
Hello.
Hello.
First of all, I just want to welcome you guys to the con. This is my first TFCon. Having you two here has been really, really special, and I really appreciate you guys coming out. So I'm a huge fan of G1. It was one of my first introductions to the series because I was just like, oh, it looks so cool. And I just wanted to know, it seems like it was a really fun bunch of people to work with. So what would be like some of your favorite stories of being with the cast in or out of the studio?
Well, the way it worked was the studio, Wally Studio was in two parts. There was the inner part of the studio. There was a big table where we sat waiting to go on when we were going to be in that scene. And if we weren't in that scene, we were out in the hall carrying on, telling dirty jokes.
The reception area. I don't know why Wally's secretary, she probably still hears our voices in her sleep.
So there was a lot of, we were friends. One of the things I noticed that sitting around that table, everybody was a cartoonist. And it was amazing to me that all of these guys were cartoonists, and they were doing cartoon voices, you know. And I was a cartoonist as well, not a very good one. But one guy just did eyes. That's all he just did. pretty nice. But what was your question?
What are just like some fun stories of being with the cast in or out of the studio?
Yeah, it was an interesting time. I think it's changed now. You're starting to get young people who've never done anything but voiceovers, working in voiceover. But back then, I think the only person I knew who started out in the business was Corey Burton, who wanted to be a voice actor since his teenage years. But everybody else you would run into came from some other field. Jack and I came out of radio. You would meet stage actors, television actors, movie actors, comedians, writers.
Yeah.
And the stories that you would hear were just wonderful. You mentioned Roger C. Carmel, and he sweated more than any other human being I've ever seen. I'm not joking, he would bring a bath towel.
Yeah, but that was the joke.
Well, maybe that's what it was. I don't know. But he would bring a bath towel to sessions, and he would be mopping his brow, and by the end of the day, the bath towel would be wringing wet. And for some reason, he detested Charlton Heston. Not for his politics or his stand on gun control. He just thought Charlton Heston was a lousy actor. And it was like the old Three Stooges bit, Niagara Falls. Slowly I turned, step by step. All you had to say to him was Charlton Heston, and he took off like a rocket. That man calls himself an actor! I remember that.
And if anybody ever overacted, it was Roger.
But I mean, we would hear these wonderful stories. Most of them were far too long. We'd be here till 6 o'clock at night. Stanley Ralph Ross, no relation, although we used to kid about it. He said, I'm from the Russian Jewish branch of the family, and I said, I'm from the drunken Irish part. He told me a wonderful story about meeting Fred Astaire. It was far too long, but that kind of thing.
Well, thank you.
Thank you.
Hi, also welcome. Thank you very much for coming.
Thank you.
The voiceover industry seems to be a very close-knit group of supportive people and individuals. And I was wondering if you could tell any brief stories about individuals in the community and in the industry that have not only inspired your career, but have also inspired you in personal level, in your personal lives.
Yeah.
Well, I can think of a few people who inspired me not to do what they did.
I was a disc jockey, and when I got to LA, and I needed an agent, and we didn't have agents in Portland or Reno or other places that I'd worked, but I needed an agent, and Gary Owens was one of the guys. Gary was this guy, you know, on Blackfin. I used to call him up and say, Gary, this is you.
And he would reply, hello, me.
Well, he always said, oh, there's business. So I was chatting with Gary, and I had done a demo tape of character voices, and I played it for Gary, and I said, what do you think I should do with this? And he said, well, here comes my agent down the hall. And he said, he introduced me to his agent, and he said, this is Jack, blah, 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 and would you listen to his tape? And the guy listened to my tape, and he said, oh, yeah. He said, you could get an agent with that. And I said, well, I need an agent. He said, oh, sure, come on. So I got an agent, my first agent that fast, that easy. So Gary was instrumental in helping me get my first agent. That's another guy that there wasn't a mean bone in his body. He just was the nicest man. And so I'd have to say, you know, Gary Owens, and then after that was Wally Burr, and after that is that broad sitting over there. That's Arlene Thornton, and her other name is Arlene Angel. She's my wife or my mother.
Please, you better figure out which. I guess I only met him very briefly, and I didn't really have a chance to thank him. But I guess I was inspired mostly by Casey Kasem, because I was coming out of... I was coming out of radio. I didn't even know voiceover existed until 1970 when a record promoter happened to say voiceovers, and I said, what the hell's that? I wanted to do this stuff, but I wondered who does these commercials, who does these cartoons, and I had this sort of stupid theory that it was on-camera people moonlighting and picking up a couple of bucks on the side, which it was, I guess, in a few cases, but I had no idea that voiceover existed as a separate entity. And I'm very grateful to Tony Richland, you probably know Tony, for telling me that. But anyway, here came Casey with basically the same background I had, and my God, he made it across the Great Divide. And I thought maybe I could do that too. Because I really had no acting credentials, I had taken no classes, I knew nothing, but I just had this dream, and I thought maybe I could do what Casey did. So I'm grateful to him on that level.
Thank you very much.
Yeah.
Hello, gentlemen.
Hello.
Thank you for coming. Pleasure. My question for Neil, I was curious, and correct me if I'm wrong, but is it true that you're the voice of the Biff Tannen Museum in Back to the Future too?
That is in fact the fact, yes.
Wow, okay.
Guilty as charged.
Nice. Well, you did a good job. And I wondered how that role came about.
I do too. I'm not being a smartass. Sometimes jobs fall out of the sky. And I had done the voice of Honest John in An American Tale, which was produced by Steven Spielberg. And of course, Spielberg did Back to the Future too. But in that cartoon, I played a drunken Irish mouse. So I find it hard to believe that they said, we're going to get a voice for the Biff Tannen Museum. What do you think about the drunken Irish mouse? Does that work for you? All I know is I got a call from my agent, go to Universal Studios at such and such a time and report to such and such a place. And I said, how did I get this? And she said, oh, don't ask questions, just go. And they fall out of the sky sometimes. And this one did, and I was in and out. I think I did 2 takes. They said, great, we're happy, away you go.
I've done that movie too.
Oh, yeah, I didn't know that.
Yeah, I was a mouse.
And little did I suspect that years later people would come up and shake my hand and say, you're part of the trilogy. Wow, that's a gift.
Yeah,
it really is.
And didn't even know what a trilogy was.
I had to go look it up.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So I have a quick question that comes back to the movie. As we know, a lot of the superstars that came off obviously wouldn't continue into the animated season that followed. So I guess my question kind of is unique to both of you is that at what point when you were cast as Springer for the movie, did you know you continue on to the animated series? And then for Ultra Magnus, at what point did you have to audition for that role and we were just told who's the closest guy to Robert Stack that would get that role? How did that process work out for you guys?
Well, as I said earlier, I had already done Springer for a number of television episodes. So, and I'm assuming that's why they didn't replace me with a celebrity. The rest of those characters were brand new when the movie came out. But Springer had already been in several episodes, so I think that's how I got to keep that.
And the Stack role was, as I said before, he wasn't going to do the series. And so Wally had different people read for it, and I got the closest.
Thank you.
Hi guys, I just was curious, do you have any good Scatman Brothers or Chris Latta stories?
I have absolutely killer Scatman Crothers story, although it doesn't really involve Scatman that much, but it's a great story. I don't think you were there that day, but you might have been. It was a Transformers session, and a very small cast, maybe 6 of us, and we're sitting around the table waiting for Wally to come in. And somebody says, and we knew Scatman was not in the best of health. And somebody said, well, I haven't seen Scatman in a while. How's he doing? Well, I don't know. Anybody know? No. Well, we'll ask Wally when he comes in. So Wally comes in and we go, hey, Wally, how's Scatman doing? Oh, he's great. He's fine. He's a crazy son of a bitch. I said, really? He says, yeah, he called me up the other day to tell me he's black. I said, really? Yeah. He said, yeah. I was in my office and Ellen said, the Scatman's on the phone. I picked up a whole Scatman. He said, hello, Wally. I'm just calling to tell you I'm black. And I said, what the hell did you say to him? I said, everybody knows you're black, you crazy bastard. I'm busy. I'll talk to you later. He says, yeah, you know, he's still working. You got to hand it to him. Actually, he's been working on a movie. He's been out of town for about 3 weeks, and he wasn't calling to tell me he was black. He was calling to tell me he's back. And he runs out of the room and runs in his office and slams the door and calls Scatman to apologize, and we just fell on the floor. I'm picturing Scatman, you know? I don't know why I give him a rotary phone in this story, but I got to call my old friend Wally Burr and let him know I'm back. Scatman here, I just wanted to tell you I'm back. Oh, everybody knows you're black and crazy. Now, I apologize for the profanity. The story doesn't work without it. Well, I can sure clear a room.
So I'd like to ask about the Super Friends and how you got that job, or any favorite stories from doing the Super Friends.
Well, that's easy for me. I wasn't in Super Friends.
That's easy for me because I was. Once again, Wally, at that time, it was pre his Marvel days, he was working at Hanna-Barbera and called me in to read for one of the roles. And then it turned out I wound up being the Flash. The voice for the Flash was a little higher. Yeah, let's go. And the voice, then I got Hawkman. The Hawkman voice was my deep voice. And then he needed somebody to do Super Samurai. Super Samurai was this kind of. But they had an artist, a Japanese artist, and he came in every time we recorded to make sure that I said the Japanese words absolutely correctly. I never had to read it again because I did it wrong. But I don't remember all the words. That's been such a long time. But one of them was "Tomei, thank you." And then he would nod. Okay, we move on to the next one, and something about a haiku. But he was always there. Whenever I was there, he was there, making sure that I said the Japanese words right. So that wasn't a very interesting story, was it?
We try to end these on a high note, John.
Well, okay, Jonathan Winters was Papa Smurf, Grandpapa Smurf, back in Hanna-Barbera. He later did Papa Smurf in the movies, but he was Grandpapa Smurf. And Jonathan, the process was we'd come in and sit around a table and for a table read to make sure everybody knew what they were supposed to say. And so if you got there early, Jonathan would do what constituted a comedy album. He was hysterical. And then the director would come in and we would read. And then we'd walk down the hall to the studio, and while we were waiting to start, Jonathan would do part 2 of his comedy album. And then we record, and whenever it was time to work, Jonathan worked. He didn't screw around. And when it was all over, we'd go to the parking lot, and Jonathan would stand there and do in crazy off the top of his head comedy for as long as anybody would stand there. And when finally everybody left, then he would have to go home too. He was really only alive when he was making people funny, laugh, rather.
You're waiting for me. I was just patiently waiting for you.
I can be done if you want me to.
Oh, we got one more question. Okay, I was just going to say that we've got about 2 or 3 minutes left if you had any fun anecdotes. But this gentleman has a specific question, so I will defer to him.
Okay.
Nice to meet you. My name is William Fong. So what would Springer and Ultra Magnus say to each other right now, 2017?
Oh, God, we're old. Do robots get Social Security?
As I recall, I died.
I want to compliment you on looking so remarkably lifelike.
This is as good as it gets.
Thank you very much.
Is yours still signing autographs?
Yes, we'll be back out there momentarily.
And,
So
and you're back here tomorrow for the
Yes.
Voiceover 101 panel.
Yes.
So if you have not had enough of Neil and Jeff yet, there's plenty of more time.
When is the Voiceover 101 panel?
It's tomorrow at...
Tomorrow?
1 p.m.
Oh, yeah, I'll be there.
And then are we involved in the script reading at 5, or is that something?
Yes, I believe that's at 5.
Today at 5.
Yes, so
Well,
I guess we're back here for that as well.
I would like to make a few closing remarks, and Jack probably does too. But,
Yes, you
I'll
may.
go first if you want. Or second.
My only closing remark is, remember FDIC.
And mine is some assembly required. No, I've had a little bit of fun at Wally's expense, and this is the first time I have appeared in public since he passed away. And I don't, obviously in the past when I would talk about him, whether he was there or not, there was always a chance you would hear about it, and I was aware that Wally could be a little prickly at times, and I kind of watched what I said. But now that he's gone, I don't think I would say anything different. The first show I ever did was Wally, because he met my agent somewhere, and she was a young, struggling agent with a bunch of young, struggling actors, and he kind of took a shine to her, and he said, anytime you want to send your people in, I'll be happy to read them, and that's how I got my first job. And arguably a huge slice of my career was with Wally. Some people had problems with some of his directing style, but I always said Wally would be entitled to say one thing, at least, if not many more, and that would be, listen, Ross, there's only really 1 or 2 shows where people are flying you all over the world and they want your autograph and they tell you what a great guy you are, and it just so happens I voice directed both of those shows. And maybe that's not a coincidence, and maybe I actually knew what the hell I was doing. And I would have to say you're absolutely right, Mr. Burr, you're absolutely right. So, to the late, great Wally Burr,
I just want to take issue with one thing he said.
only one?
One. He said there's no limousine, there's no, none of that stuff. But I work a lot for Pixar, and that's a really classy organization. And they do all their filming and stuff, even though they're connected with Disney. They have a studio, a whole campus up in Emeryville, which is just closer to the Bay than Berkeley, if you know that area. And so they needed me to do, I guess, a promo for Monster University. And I had done several shows with them in the past. So they sent a limo. Well, we went to Burbank Airport. They put me on an airplane. We flew up to Oakland. I got in the limo, went to Pixar, did the session. They gave me lunch. They gave me a guided tour too. Back in the limo, back to the airport, back to Burbank. The limo picked me up and brought me home.
Yeah, but did the check clear? I never considered an actual job till the check clears. One other thing. People at these events come up and thank me for the various voices I've performed. And I always like to turn it around and say thank you. People who watched, people who cared. Thanks to you, I got to spend my entire adult life basically doing what I love. And the percentage of human beings in this world who can say that is sadly very, very, very tiny. And so I sincerely thank you, one and all.
Yes. there's ample evidence that all of this is a big illusion. And we're just a bunch of atoms all jammed together. And the whole purpose of our lives is to have fun. And so if you're not having fun, you're doing your life wrong. So have fun. We have never worked for a living. We have done something that we've loved. And it was never work. And we made nice money and had great careers. And we wind up with people like you. Your passion for what we did is so much stronger than our passion for what we did.
Nobody move, I want to take a picture. My wife doesn't believe anybody shows up at these. So I want to prove her wrong. I'll be right with you. Yeah. All right. Everybody applaud and cheer.